Alright, hello everybody. Today I want to be talking about the secondary stat changes in 7.1.5. So I got a question the other day asking me whether the stat changes would affect disk. So obviously, with the reduction of stats, I think it was about whether, the reduction of haste, whether we'll be able to use enough Shadowmens to actually heal in Mythic Pluses anymore. And that kind of stems from a lack of knowledge in the community about what changes are coming in, and that's also kind of a lack on Blizzard's part about not conveying properly what's happening and what's changing. So Law yesterday had this post here which pretty much sums up what they were saying in the last Q&A, I believe, about what they're changing with secondary stats. So I suggest that you have a read through this post and you kind of understand why they're changing some stuff. But I actually want to talk today about whether you should be concerned about. And I'm just going to say it now. No, you should not be concerned at all. There's a reason why we're seeing these stat reductions, but there is another thing that's to come, which they're saying is in the next build, which you should expect from these PTR builds, is that we're going to get the balancing patch coming, I think, next week. So what they're doing is they're increasing, they're making it so an item level upgrade, say from heroic to mythic, should be an item level upgrade. Now, that is a very good thing. That is something everybody should want. You shouldn't be sitting there on your Fire Mage going, my 850 piece of gear from Mythic Plus is my best in slot. That is an awful, kind of thing to have if you're playing a class like a Fire Mage, or if you're playing something like a Priest. You don't want it so an 850 piece of gear is your best in slot. It's just not fun to play with. So what they're planning on doing is they're planning on changing classes so they're not so reliant on certain secondary stats. So I'm going to use the Mage as the prime example. So Mages right now have a heavy reliance on crit, because all of their damage is built into Pyroblast, and you can only use Pyroblast when you crit. So then, having a high amount of crit will mean you can do a lot more damage than if you would otherwise. So what that ends up happening is that crit will heavily outweigh something like intellect, and then to balance the game around players having a high amount of crit, we see a very low intellect modifiers, spell power modifiers on their spells. So that's why we're seeing the class like a Fire Mage, for example, they're probably one of the best examples, is that they're getting pretty much completely reworked, so their damage isn't all based around crit. Now, the class should be still, primarily, crit is still going to be their best stat, but we shouldn't see crit being 2 to 3 times more powerful than every other secondary stat. So that hopefully with these changes, we're going to see you actually being able to play a Fire Mage with your highest item level gear and actually getting rewarded for doing higher content, etc., etc. So that's kind of the goal in what they want to do when changing these the stats and the classes and how they work. Now, how they're doing that, so apart from changing the classes, they're also going to be making necks and rings more impactful, like for item level. So for people who don't know right now, so your intellect will scale exponentially. So the difference between 800 and 810 item levels is significantly less than what it would be at say 900 to 910. You might be getting 50 intellect change from 800 to 810, whereas between 900 and 910 you might be getting 200 or something. So that it's an exponential change in the amount of intellect you'll be getting. Now with the secondary stats, that doesn't happen. So the secondary stats, you get a linear gain. So, the difference between 800 and 810 will be the exact same difference between 900 and 910. So what this causes is the rings and necks to be less impactful for item level. So you might see your best in slot ring, neck or ring being something that's 850 item level. And that might be your best in slot ring, neck or ring until something, that is, say, pure crit comes along. So, in the Q&A, they were talking about this, and they were saying that how they don't like the current state of rings and necks, and they want them to be an item slot that you look to upgrade, and that you want to upgrade with something with a higher item level. So they're increasing the amount of secondary stats on these rings and necks, and this is primarily why you see the increase in stats required. So for we'll use crit again. So the amount of crit required to get 1% has gone up from 350 to 400, and that's purely to compensate for the increased stats you'll be getting on your rings and necks. And so this last goal here that we're seeing is that they don't want to lower the player power. So like every PTR and every beta, the first changes we see that come in are the changes, the class changes, and then we're going to see a balance change coming through. So, for everybody who's crying about how Mage and Shadow Priest and Survival Hunters aren't doing damage at the moment, where you should be expecting a balance patch coming in very soon to realign some of the numbers, to buff some of the talents, etc. To see how the changes actually come in. So, before everybody's reading these headline debates about, whether your class is destroyed or whatnot, take a minute, read into the issue, figure out what's actually happening, and have some faith, because Blizzard does, as much as some people might not like it, Blizzard does a fantastic job at balancing the game. There's thousands of different variables that go into, making sure that every class is, relatively, the same power level, and every spec is at relatively same power level, and that every spec is diverse. So there's thousands of things they do to balance all the time, and they really do a pretty good job at doing it. So don't be up in arms about the changes. Give your feedback on how you might not like the gameplay. Don't be saying that this class does no damage because XYZ. You've nerfed my class, blah blah. Just the balance patch is coming in. Try and give some feedback on how the actual, how the spec is playing, and whether you find the new specs fun and whatnot. And don't be concerned about the 7.1.5 secondary stat changes, because they should all be ironed out and come hopefully next week, I believe. Anyway, I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching. Bye.